Erin Murphy. Thank you. Here for town hall talk today. So that's pretty much your introduction. I think there's nothing else. If you want to get rolling, you can jump right in. You can jump right in.
Can you guys hear me? Yes. Okay. Good. Well, thank you guys so much for being here.
Oh boy. You're good.
Awesome.
Sorry.
No problem. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. For those of you that I haven't had the chance to meet face-to-face or in person, I'm Grant Hauschild, your state senator. I represent the largest and most rural district in the state, so we're kind of in the center of the district right here in Ely. And I'm really proud. We're on legislative break right now, and this is actually my 5th town hall across the district. So despite the size of the district and how big it is, it's the size of the state of Massachusetts, I've been traveling to every corner of the district to hear directly from constituents and have the chance to have dialogue and conversation about the issues that matter most to them. Luckily, with this 5th one, I'm humbled and grateful to be joined by our majority leader, Senator Erin Murphy, who is coming with me on sort of a tour of the district and doing this town hall with me. So we're really lucky to have her to really hear the voices of northern Minnesotans and talk about the issues as we sort of enter this last month and a half of the legislative cycle. So I'll let her introduce herself, but really this is about you guys and about the questions that you have. So I'm not here to do a soliloquy on all the priorities and issues I have, but happy to talk about the things you want to talk about. So we'll jump right in after Erin gives a little introduction.
Thank you, Senator Hauschild. Also Grant. Grant and I office next door to each other, and so it was good to be here with all of you, and really sight for sore eyes to be together with so many people. I represent a district in St. Paul. I'm a registered nurse. I'm a mom, but I started serving in the House, and I served in the House for 12 years and came to the Minnesota Senate about 5 years ago. And we are in a moment in America, and I've been doing town halls in the district I represent and in other places across the state. This is the second of a 4-day tour through the northern part of the state, and for me, I've always found my path to effective representation and being a part of governing together through the people of Minnesota by listening, working our way through the things we may disagree about, the things that we do agree about, but the path to doing the work that I believe in inside the Capitol is through with the people of Minnesota, and I'm just delighted that you're deciding to spend an hour and a little more time with us. Thank you for being here.
Well, I just want to say one last thing. I'm the co-chair of the Civility Caucus in the legislature. This is a group of 4 legislators, 2 in the House, 2 in the Senate, bipartisan, who try to bring folks together despite our partisan differences, to get to know one another, understand what our similarities are, and then perhaps have the opportunity to work bipartisanly on legislation. But that's not really the purpose. The purpose is to understand each other and know where we're coming from, where we might disagree in the future, and to just try to bring down the temperature on a lot of the partisan rhetoric that we see, especially in our national environment. So I'm hopeful that this town hall, much like my other town halls, can be civil and that we can respect one another despite perhaps our deep differences. So with that, I do have Mr. Lee Cutler here, who is just going to help volunteer with the microphone if folks have questions. And I do ask if you'd be willing to say your first and last name and then where you're from, and then ask your question. So with that, we'll get started. If you want to raise your hand, we'll do our best to sort of have Lee track things and call on folks. So thanks so much again for being here.
You had your hand up first there.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Edward Swolpinski. I am from in town, actually not too far from here in Pine Manor. And one thing I've noticed, if you look at a map of the northern third of Minnesota, you see a few medium-sized cities in a straight line, and they're only connected really by highway. So I think it might be a good idea to have some sort of maybe public transport system because, well, I'm sure everyone in here has worried about gas prices at some point, and what's the best way to save money on gas? Just not use it. And what's a better way to do that than some public transportation, you know? And it could also help with a feeling of isolation, because we are a relatively isolated town. But imagine if you could go have brunch with your pals in Grand Rapids and be home in time to take a nice bath and then go to bed.
Sounds like a nice step to me. Thanks so much, Eddie, for your passion. I know that we have met at your school when I have toured and visited there previously. Appreciate that you're willing to ask the first question. I think you're exactly right? We need to look at all options for transportation. We are in a very rural area, as we've already talked about extensively here in the beginning, and so it is a little bit difficult to make the economics work for something like a public train or something like that. But if we could look at bus routes or more opportunities for public transportation in these rural areas, I think that would help a tremendous amount. And then you also consider the fact that we have a lot of veterans in northern Minnesota who need to get transportation down to either Duluth or the Twin Cities, or folks with maybe healthcare or mental health needs. All of those opportunities are oftentimes at different places. So we need those options for folks. And I know that in 2023, during the legislative cycle when I was first elected, we passed a historic transportation bill that did a whole lot of both public and critical infrastructure funding for transportation. And that money is really getting out the door now, so I'm hopeful that that will start making a difference. Thanks for the first question.
Well, welcome to you, Senator Murphy and Senator Hauschild, and thank you so much for coming. And of course, here you're at the gateway to the Boundary Waters Community Wilderness, which is really the crown jewel of Minnesota's natural resources. But it's also an area that we've been working
Loud, just right up there.
It's also an area that we have been working to protect since 1902 from one threat after another. Fortunately, our hard work paid off in 2023 when the Biden administration closed federal lands in the headwaters to the Boundary Waters, Quetico Park, and Voyageurs National Park to copper mining. That was a very important science-based move that supports our regional economy. Our outdoor rec industry in Minnesota is a $13.5 billion industry, and a lot of it comes from here. So we're very grateful. But as everyone in this room knows, the world changed on January 20th, and we've been tracking executive orders and secretarial orders and internal decisions in the Trump administration, all of which are bad when it comes to protecting our natural world, protecting nature, protecting our wildlife. We've had executive orders prioritizing mining as the priority use on all 700 million acres of federal public lands. We have orders that have said we want expedited mining projects with minimal environmental review. We recently had orders that said we want sunset provisions on important regulations, Endangered Species Act, meaning they go away at the end of 2026. And we have directions to modify and weaken the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act. The Boundary Waters is not only a national wilderness, it's our state wilderness. And the state has always had a role in protecting the Boundary Waters. And I'm asking the two of you in the Minnesota Senate to do everything you can to protect the Boundary Waters from the Trump administration and the draconian measures that are coming, to protect our regional economy, to protect the young people's future who enjoy the Boundary Waters. We're here to help and work with you. Senator Swazinski has a great bill that he's introduced, the Boundary Waters Permanent Protection Bill. And just so you know, it's Senate File 875, I'm sure you'll remember that, that would provide protections and block copper mining in the headwaters of the Boundary Waters. And there are numerous other ways I suspect that we can step up through our regulatory agencies and make sure that we protect this crown jewel. So thank you for being here. We're eager to work with you. And I know you share and appreciate our love for this place.
Thank you, Becky, and I know you've come to a couple of my town halls, and we've had this dialogue for many years now, so I definitely appreciate it. You know, for me, I think a lot of you know my position. My position is that I don't think that mining decisions should be determined by presidential election politics. That concerns me. in my mind, I would like there to be a process at the state level that determines whether or not an individual mine plan can happen safely, effectively, and in an environmentally friendly way. What I don't agree with the Trump administration on is expediting permits, opening up all federal land to mining, not looking at our environmental policies that protect our natural environment. These are the things that I think go far too far from the objective process that I would favor that we have in the state of Minnesota. And I think we've done mining well in the state of Minnesota, and I think we can evaluate these projects individually and determine, again, whether Twin Metals can happen or Talon Metals or New Range. Those are individual projects that should be evaluated by the experts that do this work. So that's really my position. Now, when it comes to the other things that are happening with the Trump administration, I've been very forceful in calling out those things. Whether it's the across-the-board firings of Forest Service and National Park Service members, whether it's the cuts that could be coming down the pike on Medicaid, if you don't think that our rural communities in northern Minnesota will be most impacted by those Medicaid cuts, then you're foolish, because it will cause a shutdown of some of our rural hospitals. It will cause nursing homes to close. These are the things that I think will impact our lives most directly, and so I'm not afraid to call out when I see bad ideas, regardless of which party they are. But when it comes to that moratorium, I would favor us having a state objective analyzed process for whether or not those mine plans can happen.
I would just like to add, first, thank you for the question, and yes, the crown jewel is right, the boundary waters. So important for us in so many ways. I have been reflecting in this recess that we're in quite a bit on what we're experiencing together as people here in Minnesota, really across the country, and why gatherings like this are so important. What the current president is doing is really outside of the boundaries of what we would ever expect for someone elected to represent us in an office. Often breaking the law, often turning the back on the courts, stripping away the responsibility of the Congress and owning that responsibility to himself, and the Congress letting that happen. We are in a place that I had hoped we never would be. The first Trump administration was not this cavalier or reckless, and I think across the state, Minnesotans are recognizing the real risk to the things that we treasure, and to the ways in which we live our lives in communities across the country and across the state. And that's why people are showing up in numbers like this all over the state. And in the place where I find comfort in the wake of the concern that I feel and the things that keep me up at night is us, it's each other, and finding our way back together, and in a way that isn't necessarily in a partisan this or that, but instead as a community together, standing up for the things that we believe in, remembering that we actually have the power in our hands, not just at election time, but in between the elections, to guide and self-govern. That is something I've always held dear as an elected official, and long before that as a person who just believed in democracy, and I still do. But that call in to joining together, that sense of belonging, that sense of we are Minnesota, not the land it is, but we are Minnesota, I think is the most important part of what is going to get us through these next number of years until we have another election, which isn't that far away. But to weather what we're experiencing with this White House and with the President and a Congress who seems so willing to step away from the norms of what we expect. So on the question that you're asking and the things that Senator Hauschild is raising, the things we're concerned about, we'll find our path forward, but we're going to have to do it together.
Thank you, Ely.
Can you hear me? Okay. Lee Peterson, Greenwood Township, originally from Glenwood. And I've got a little story. I'm a downhill skier. and primarily Giants Ridge. Last fall, I met a new ski patrol over there, and we got to talking, and he said, this is my first year. I mean, he's not from the area here, he drives up. And he said, I was told during training by the other ski patrol that if I come upon somebody who's hurt on the hill and they need a doctor, to try and figure out a way to get that person to either self-transport or have friends transport him to Duluth. Do not call an area ambulance so he ends up in a range hospital, because that could be a trap. We'll have to wait hours and sometimes days to get transferred to Duluth. It's inevitable, because the hospitals up here don't treat a lot of stuff anymore. So this is a two-aspect thing, and I don't know, it's more of a statement than a question, but it deserves a lot of attention. And I'd like Erin to answer this, because she's a nurse and she knows what I'm talking about. And this covers two things: rural hospitals, which are failing, and rural ambulance services, which are failing. And what I hope she's read the Office of Legislative Auditor's Report 2022 on the EMSRB and the Rural Ambulance Service, and I'd like Erin to respond to this, because she's a nurse. Thanks.
Thanks for your question, and I am a nurse. And I want to make sure that we give Senator Hauschild here, Grant, space here as well, because he's done a lot of work on EMS since he's been in office, a lot of profound work. I ran for office in the very beginning. I never thought I would do this, but ran because I took care of my mom at the end of her life, and like so many people, even the insurance company was directing her care that was not in her best interest. And it made it made me mad, it made all my aunts mad, and I ran. And I have been working on healthcare ever since, and I am embarrassed to say that I don't believe that the healthcare system is a whole lot better now than it was when I first got elected in 2007. It feels like the industry itself, the insurance industry in particular, has taken hold in such a way that we are in many ways stripping care, and often the decisions are being made by rural facilities because they're either consolidating, which we've seen over and over again, the cycle of consolidation and breaking up. And we're in a period of deep consolidation, but there's also a different kind of financial pressure on the healthcare system that didn't exist when I was first elected, or when I was organizing for the Nurses Association around the passage of Minnesota Care. We're in, I think, a perilous spot in our healthcare system. You see it most acutely in rural places, where service lines are closing, hospitals are closing, clinics are closing, and larger parts of the state are going without access to care, as you're describing. And we're going to have to figure out how to pump the brakes and make the turn to a system that is financed differently than this one is, that has a commitment to the people across the state of Minnesota. One last thing I'll say, because we're in the middle of setting the budget in the legislature right now. Senator Wickland in particular, in her bill, she's the Health and Human Services Chair, is doing, I think, some very important work right now to make sure that we're paying attention to rates, MA rates, both for inpatient hospital care and outside of hospital care. And she's doing some work to make sure that the undergirding of the system is intact, especially as we anticipate cuts coming from the federal government to Medicaid. So this year, she's such a brilliant tactician. When she thinks about the system as a whole, she is working within it to make sure that we're weatherizing, if you will, the healthcare system for what comes next, but in a way that will begin. It's one of those steps that says, okay, we understand the rates that are being paid right now aren't adequate, so we're going to change the rates, and we're going to do some this other method, drawing down federal funding for the hospitals to get a little more money into the system to help stabilize what is a system that feels pretty unstable right now. I really appreciate your question.
Yeah, and I need to talk to you more about the ambulance situation, the rural ambulance situation. There was a big study done by the OLA and a wonderful report, and there was a task force created that fell flat on its face. I don't think most of it even read the OLA report. There needs to be consolidation of rural ambulances for economic reasons and to upgrade them to advanced life support ambulances. And then there need to be tax districts created to finance that so we can afford to pay ambulance personnel to be able to live where we live and not be nomads running from one service to another, 4 hours here, 12 hours there, 13 hours there to try and make a living. They need to be able to live amongst us, and that district taxing is a part of it.
Lee, if I can, I know we've talked a lot about these issues, and I feel like when...
Absolutely, and I'm disappointed in what you and your task force have not done.
Yeah, well, we're working on it still, right? This is not something that...
I've heard that too much.
I agree. When I was first running, I heard EMS as the top issue. And for the last decade before I was elected, no one had done a thing about EMS. Not a single thing. So what we did when I was elected is we formed this task force. I asked the governor, we formed this task force. We went to DC. I went to DC twice to talk to our federal delegation to say, look, Medicare and Medicaid rates have to be increased if rural services are ever going to survive. Then what we did is a short-term EMS aid package that went to places like the Ely Ambulance Service, like the Tower Ambulance Service, to help give them a lifeline based on the fact that many of them were going bankrupt. Now this session, we're stepping up and doing a little bit more. We're looking at the taxing district to try to provide some aid packages to EMS taxing districts to try to encourage them to look at consolidation, because I do think that is part of the answer. So we've been working on the legislation based on that OLA report. Not all of it gets done all at once, but we're really putting together different packages. The other thing we're doing is in Senator Wickland's HHS bill is we are increasing the Medicaid and Medicare rate match at the state level, and we're specifically calling out rural EMS to get a higher percentage of those reimbursements, because we know that the folks are drowning with EMS in rural areas, not the metro. So really, we are taking a multifaceted approach to the EMS issue, but know that it's an ongoing discussion, it's an ongoing legislative process, and we're just getting started.
Has the legislature, have you mandated that the primary service areas which were drawn in the early 1980s be redrawn to reflect the changes in demography and where the hospitals are and where the hospitals are that can treat people? Like the story I just said, that person can't get fixed in Virginia or so forth.
Yeah.
They're called to Ely. To Duluth. They have to be.
No, I hear every...
Life support ambulances, that's the big delay. Sometimes they wait for days to get an advanced life support
Sure, I know we have a lot of questions here, so we have to thank you though. I know it's a very important topic for you, but here.
Hi, Sarah Vogel from Ely. A few weeks ago, I was in a Zoom call with you regarding copper nickel mining and several others, and you expressed your current thoughts on the letter you sent with, I think it was Stubber, to President Trump. I asked you if you would publicly release a statement letting all of your constituents know those thoughts, and you said no because you were in the business of winning elections. But you would consider speaking to it at a town hall, so I'm here to remind you of that and ask if you'd like to speak to that.
Yeah, so just to be clear, I didn't say that I wouldn't do it. I said that I would consider it. Yeah. And I'm certainly happy to say, here's my position again, just so I can repeat it. I don't believe that a moratorium is the best way for us to handle mining policy. I firmly believe that there should be an objective process that looks into this at the state level to determine whether or not a mine plan can happen. I wrote a letter to President Trump and Congressman Stauber, just like I did to the Biden administration, so same policy that I have regardless of which party was in office, saying I don't believe that a moratorium is the right way to do mining policy. I do regret sending that letter to President Trump because I think that what he is doing has crossed a line. I think what he has done with regards to the federal government, with not following the ways our laws are in place, with the bombastic way that he is talking about going away from our environmental policies that make sure we can do mining properly, those things are not things that I believe. And so what I'm saying is, look, just like I did with the Biden administration, I wrote a letter to Trump, but given what I've seen since he was elected, I don't think that that was the right thing to do, and I am sorry for that. But I still have the same position, right? That I want there to be an objective process for how mining is evaluated at the state level. I think that's the right way for us to go about it, rather than the back and forth ping pong game that happens with presidential politics on mining polls.
Have you read the Forest Service report you promised us?
I have started reading it,
Okay.
yes. And I used to work at USDA, so under the Obama administration, and I'm pretty familiar with a lot of the work that's happened in that space.
Hello, Senator.
Mike, close your mouth.
Oh, sorry, okay. Hi, my name is Joe Baltus, I'm a Lake County Commissioner, and greetings to both of you, and I want to say first off, hats off to Senator Hauschild for his support for the Ely Area Ambulance Service. I'm the chairman of that particular board, and I keep hearing that we got to do certain things a certain way, and things are being forced upon us. And I will say, if there's ever a time to not consolidate, to have separate ambulance services and separate hospitals, it's when the hospital is possibly having issues. Because if that hospital goes down or has a problem with funding, we have an ambulance service that will take us to a place where there's a hospital. So it's a second way to look at it. And so I don't necessarily agree with opening up taxing districts either by consolidating, because a 35-mile area to be covered by our ambulances here in rural Minnesota, where we've got roads that go to nowhere and all over the place, I don't think that's a great idea. I think we have to have smaller regions that those services attend to. So that being said, I do have a question to Senator Hauschild. Can you please explain? The Minnesota African American Family Preservation and Child Welfare Disproportionality Act. This is a mandate that's coming down from Governor Walz to all 87 counties in Minnesota, and it's hit our board, and we've talked about it. We're going, well, now what do we do with this? Well, it turns out we're being mandated by the state to look for African American families and render aid to them, whether they need it or not. We're not entirely sure how this works, and we want to know where we're supposed to come up with the money for this. How does this work when it's been handed to the county to say, okay, this is what you got to do now, and then they just walk away? Is the state going to provide us, financing so that we can hire an individual to do this? I don't think so, but I would like you to talk about that if you could. I realize it's kind of obscure, but it's kind of important. 87 counties are going to be hit with this, and in Lake County, I don't know how many full-time people we need on staff to implement this act. So, thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Commissioner, for being here and for your comments. It's interesting that you're bringing this up as a county commissioner, because we actually just had a meeting this morning with St. Louis County Commissioners, and this exact topic came up. In previous years, there have been a policy called ICWA, which is something where social services and counties help support tribal children and tribal citizens with concerns through their social service programming. This is really an extension of that for African American children and families. So I do think there are a lot of concerns from county level government saying, how do we implement this? How do we do this? There's currently a pilot going on in Hennepin and I believe it's Ramsey County, sort of looking at how they will implement it there. Obviously there's quite a bit more demand in those counties for those types of services. So we'll see how those pilot programs go, but I hear your concerns. I've heard it from other county commissioners. How are we gonna pay for this? When's the implementation date? And how can we maybe provide some relief to our counties to really properly be able to do this? So I think those conversations are ongoing, but definitely an area that I do think we need to address, right? I think there are concerns about welfare for African American children, similar with tribal children, and so we have to do something. I think it's just figuring out how we're gonna make this work. So those conversations are ongoing. I don't know if you have anything to add about it. You might, okay.
My name is Suzanne Mattis, former Ely resident in the 80s and permanent retired Ely resident now. So my question, you mentioned there in the budget, the state is in budget negotiations, and the House has their budget, and the state and the Senate has their budget out. What I'm aware of is that the housing portion of those two budgets In the House, it includes $100 million in housing infrastructure bonds and $30 million in family homeless prevention assistance program in the House, where the Senate only has $3 million. As a pastor over the years in rural as well as urban settings, it's really clear that without stable housing, nothing else falls in place in your life. And it's also clear to me in the legislative advocacy I've done that homeless prevention is a legislative choice, as we've seen with and how we've reduced veteran homelessness. So my question is, will the governor's commitment to, is his commitment to ending homelessness and preventing homelessness strong enough to support the House budget in housing as opposed to the Senate budget?
I really appreciate your question. And you can't really live your life, go to school, learn, go to your job, be healthy, etc., without a safe place to live. And you will recall that in the last budget, we invested more than $1 billion in housing. A real commitment on the part of our caucus and of the legislature signed by the governor. That commitment hasn't faded, but our economic situation has, and our political situation has. So without getting too deep into the weeds about the legislature and budgeting, we made a commitment, like the governor did, when we approached the budget in the Senate. We have to budget for 2 years. That's the Constitution's requirement. But in Minnesota, we have set a standard for ourselves that we look out 4 years. So we have 2 years that we have to set for, and 2 more years, which we call our planning years, sometimes affectionately called the tails. So we want to know ahead, where are we headed? And all of that, the demographic information, economic information, the forecasters, they take a look at that. They set a forecast. We build our budget based on that forecast, which we got in March. So the budget that we're setting now is for the next 2 and 4 years. And we decided in the Senate, because of the uncertainty in Washington, D.C., and because when we have deficits, things like homeless support, health care, care for the disabled, all of what we consider a proper role for us together, where people are vulnerable, are more vulnerable because of a deficit in the budget. We decided we should balance for 4 years and not for 2. In the House, I think you will see that they've taken a different approach. And so they have more money to spend because they have a deficit out in the tails of that planning cycle. And we're going to have to square the House proposal with our proposal and the governor's proposal, because he, like us, said let's budget and balance in for 4 whole years. And let's start to attack that structural deficit that we can see out on the horizon so that it is not so challenging when we get to that point in time. So we're taking a more structural approach, which means that we have agreed to include some revenue in our budget, in our proposal, and we are doing some spending reductions in our proposal. The House doesn't have any revenue. They do have some spending reductions, but not that many because they only balance for 2 years. And the governor has, like we do, some revenue and some spending reductions over those 4 years. So when we come together, the House, the Senate, and the administration, when we come back from this recess, we're going to have to start reconciling those differences, including, do we want budget stability, which is the standard in Minnesota, not for 2, but for 4 years. And as a person who served in 2023, when we balanced the budget, all the Democrats together, I want to bring that same responsibility to the next budget. We balanced the budget. We have a modest surplus right now. It's stable. We have $3.5 billion in reserve that will help us weather whatever comes from Washington, D.C. I cross my fingers. So we're in a stable place, and we have to bring that same fiscal stability to the budget going forward, because without it, vulnerable people will be in trouble. I would love to see our housing number go up, but first we have to square those budgets to make sure that we are working from the same plan with the same goal. And then we'll get to work on the actual appropriations within those areas. I really appreciate your question. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just very quickly add, I think it's wrong that we would leave a deficit of $1.3 billion on the underlying. I really think we have to be fiscally responsible and balance our budgets, and that's what the Senate is putting forward. The House's budgets, in my opinion, again, this is just my opinion, I think they're fake, because they are not balancing the budget. So they're putting numbers in housing or in transportation that, in my opinion, look pretty phony when you have a deficit hanging out there. So I prefer that we balance things, make the tough decisions, figure out how we can set our priorities based on some revenue raisers that don't impact average people, and then go from there. So I'm hopeful we can make a commitment to housing. But again, to Senator Murphy's point, we've got to be understanding of each other and have a sort of equal idea of what the budget is, rather than dealing with sort of phony numbers.
Hello, thank you both for being here. My name is Rosa Ostrike. I am a certified professional midwife, a home birth midwife here in Ely, Minnesota. I am also the president of the Minnesota Coalition of Certified Professional Midwives. For the last 2 years, I've helped DHS write a policy for home birth providers. And me and the Birth Justice Collaborative and a few other midwives put together a bill to clarify and raise reimbursement rates for home birth providers. That has been included in the Senate on this bill, and I'm asking for both of your support in that. Yes, in Minnesota, there's 53 counties that do not have birth options at hospitals. There's been 2 women that have been driving to hospitals who have called me because they are birthing their baby in their car. I have some clients in International Falls where it's over an hour and a half for them to get to a hospital, or even just to get to prenatal care. I have clients who don't have access to a car, and thus, unless there's home birth providers, they do not get prenatal or postpartum care. We live here in Ely. We are in a perinatal desert, with Ely Hospital stopping first, with International Falls, among others. And I guess I just really, yes, I really want, in order for people to live here and have families and children, which is what we need, I mean, this is not a fix to perinatal deserts, but it is the case that if people have private insurance or can pay out of pocket, then they can receive my services. But currently, I cannot afford to take Medicaid clients for the care that I give. And I also just want to say that for myself, for my children, for Minnesota, we need a ban on copper nickel mine. We need to save the Boundary Waters.
I just want to give you a shout out. Thank you for bringing those babies, and the work that the coalition has done to bring this legislation forward has been masterful, and a supporter. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Lacey Squire. I live here in Ely. I had raised my hand before the other person mentioned housing, but I'm going to go ahead and say what I was going to say anyway, so I'm sorry for the redundancy. In 2023, the city of Ely did a housing study, excuse me. I work with a program called Boundary Waters Connect, which is doing what we can to help the community and the economy. And that includes programs and services for new residents. And I observe anecdotally, and I think a lot of us do, a lot of interest in moving to this region of the state. We are very blessed with a cool food scene and really charming downtown shopping district and a lot of locally owned businesses. We have a strong arts and culture scene. And that study identified demand for over 100, like I think it was 120 units in the next 5 years. And again, that study was executed in 2023. And so I just wanted to reiterate the profound impact that an investment in housing could have on our economic stability and our ability to help serve our most vulnerable neighbors. So I really encourage you to think about what's possible once you're able to square that budget and how housing and investment in housing here could have a huge ripple effect on our stability.
Yeah, thanks, Lacey, for the question. I mean, I think a couple of things. One, in 2023, we passed a Greater Minnesota Workforce Housing Bill. That was a bill that I was championing. That put about $38 million towards Greater Minnesota Workforce Housing. But what we saw is it just, I mean, nowhere near enough, right? In the past, they had only done about $1 million or $2 million. So we thought 38 million, that's a big jump, right? Ely was in the process of being eligible for that and unfortunately didn't get the funds, which made me really angry as the author of that bill. But it's something that we looked at and I want to expand upon. The second thing I just want to say, and I'm not taking a position because I actually kind of want to read the room here, but in the 7-county metro, we passed a sales tax that went towards affordable housing funds that's currently being rolled out. And I'd be curious, I mean, we could expand that sales tax to Greater Minnesota and use that for affordable housing projects to try to create an ongoing funding stream for Greater Minnesota workforce housing. But sales taxes are regressive. I sort of have a problem with that. Maybe there's other revenue sources, but just know that we're sort of exploring those ideas so that there's a constant funding mechanism for housing because it is a tremendous need. We can talk more.
Hi, my name is Hudson Kingston. I live in Fall Lake Township. I'm the ice off reporter for MPCA for Garden Lake. And we're getting our butts kicked up here with climate change. Last winter wasn't even a winter. The power sports industry, I don't know what the right word is, but they haven't been able to pay their bills. The timber industry can't cut down trees.
Yeah.
This is a problem. Like we need to address climate change. We seriously do. And the current Senate omnibus for energy is full of garbage, to be perfectly honest. It's killing net metering. It's got a bunch of stuff about calling things carbon-free when they're not. And I understand that we have a timber industry up here. I understand that it's going to continue to exist and harvest trees. But we should not burn trees to make electricity. It's inefficient. It creates more carbon pollution. It's a vicious cycle. And it's not going to work for northern Minnesota. So I ask you, Senator Hauschild, to stop promoting biomass as a way to create electricity. It's not a good solution for northern Minnesota. We need our forests more now than ever. And we can create value-added timber products. I mean, with the border locking up with Canada, we kind of need to keep the wood we have and not let it all go up in smoke. So I encourage you to not support the current Senate omnibus. It has a lot of garbage in it, like I said, and please stop pushing woody biomass as a carbon-free alternative. It's not carbon-free. Burning things is not carbon-free.
You're exactly right. We have to do something about climate change. And I was really proud when I was elected. We had this 1-seat majority in the Senate, and we passed the strongest climate goals in the entire country. The strongest climate goals in the entire country with a 1-seat majority in the Senate. I'm really proud of the work that we did there. With regards to the energy omnibus right now, I think there's ongoing conversations within our caucus about that bill and what that might look like as a final product. I do support the biomass because I do think that we need a transition to fully green energy. I think providing those opportunities are really important to a lot of our rural cooperatives in northern Minnesota. We have even municipal energy that's very reliant on woody biomass. And you're right, we do have a pretty strong timber industry. I'm not saying it should be forever or that we should rely on that for forever. I think we should stick with our 2040 climate goals, and I don't want to retract those goals. But again, I do want us to find a glide path to making us meet those climate goals, and I think we have to be serious about that if we really truly want to keep those goals in place. One of my fears would be is if we don't provide that glide path, then the opportunity to peel it back completely becomes that much stronger. So my goal is let's provide a clear guide path, let's make sure we can meet these goals, and let's truly address climate change unlike any other Midwest state in the country.
Hello, I'm Mark Jones from the Ely Climate Group. So this is also a question about climate Our local school system has recently put in an application for a solar array through the Solar for Schools program, which will pay for about 40% of that array locally and 40% through the IRA, leaving the school to where it's only 20%. At that array, they would get payback in only 5 years. And then for years 5 through 30, the school would actually make income. In addition to generating good green energy, it would be an opportunity to teach the kids about solar array and the kids' parents about solar array and the community about solar arrays. So we hope that you will do what you can to preserve funding for these programs. Thank you.
Yes. I love it. I love it. That's great.
Hi, Megan Griggs here. I live in Ely. I moved here about 2 years ago. This is a bit of an obvious question, but I don't think it has been asked. What is your stance on mining in the boundary waters? Are you advocating for it or against it? And that's it. That's the whole question.
Sure. So my position is that there shouldn't be a federal moratorium across the board on mining. I think what we should do is have individual mine plans presented, go through the process with the DNR and with the other agencies that analyze these projects to determine whether or not mining can happen, whether it's the Twin Metals project or the Talon project. I don't believe, again, that basing our mining policy and our mining moratoriums on presidential politics is the right way to go, because all it's going to do is create all of this back and forth uncertainty with our mining policy, and I would rather it be analyzed by the experts at the DNR who look at these projects.
So yes or no?
I would be for it if it's analyzed by the DNR and goes through the process and is determined able to happen.
Hi, my name's Reed Perrin. I live in Morris Township. I would like for you both to do everything you can to support the University of Minnesota. The Trump administration has identified 15 or so major universities in the country as targets of their wrath. By the strangest coincidence, they all happen to be in states that Trump lost. I don't know why that would be. There are only 3 state schools on the list: California, Berkeley, UCLA, and the University of Minnesota. We have taconite mining in Minnesota because of the genius of Dr. Davis and the team that he led to figure out how to make taconite viable and economical. We have Honeycrisp apples because of the University of Minnesota. I have 2 clips on the tricuspid valve in my heart that were put there last Wednesday by an interventional cardiologist who is an immigrant from Ethiopia who trained at the University of Minnesota. So do all you can to protect the university. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Maggie. I'm a second-generation Eliite and a second-generation nurse. There's a lot of things I want to talk about, but I'll talk about one. I think it's important for us all to remember that Trump won this election with less votes than Biden did in 2020. In my mind, this wasn't a massive landslide victory for Trump's agenda, rather a failure of the Democratic Party at large. I think we've lost working class people generally, certainly working class rural people, because of our unwillingness to go against big money and speak to the pain that working class people experience. Unfortunately, the word oligarchy has become popularized recently by Elon Musk buying his way into the White House. The Republicans are not the only party that accepts big money donors. So my question to you is, have your politics changed since this last election? Are you willing to fight oligarchy? And what are you going to do at the Minnesota state level to try and keep big money out of politics so that the Democratic Party can remain loyal to their working class base and not their wealthy donors.
Thank you so much for the question. It's an important one, and I would encourage you to look at remarks that I gave in the Senate Tax Committee, because it was exactly on the issue that you're talking about. There is an oligarchy right now. If you look at the top 0.1%, not the top 10%, not the top 5%, or even 1%, the top 0.1% own more wealth in the United States than the bottom 90. That is an oligarchy. And when I said that, a colleague of mine across the aisle said, no, 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 oligarchy is when the oligarchs are in the government. And I said, au contraire, they are. They're in the White House, literally cutting Medicaid, literally across the board, not merit-based cuts to our Forest Service, our VA, all of these policies that they are doing as billionaire, the richest man in the world, right? Doing these things. So I think what we're doing in the Senate is actually quite profound. We are putting together a policy or a proposal that would tax social media companies in Minnesota for the amount of users that they have. This would go after Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, I can't even name the other ones, but I'm sure they work for the White House. And we're going to tax them in Minnesota and say, if you are going to mine the data of our personal information, we're going to tax you just like we tax taconite, just like we hope to tax helium and other minerals. So we are putting together those proposals, and if the other side of the aisle wants to say, no, we shouldn't do that, we should protect Elon Musk, we should protect Mark Zuckerberg, but we're going to cut nursing home funding, we're going to cut Medicaid match funding for our rural hospitals, we're not going to fund EMS services and EMS taxing districts to Lee's point, then those are the decisions before us. We can either tax the social media companies for the mining they're doing of our personal data, or we can help fund the critical services that we rely on each and every day. And that's the proposal that we're putting together as Senate Democrats.
1:30? Okay.
Thanks. Mike Molesca from Hibbing, retired taconite miner. We have all three watersheds currently being poisoned by sulfite drainage from these. 2 weeks ago, Hay Lake, which is dear to my heart and near to my home, U.S. Steel was denied a site-specific permit to increase the rate there after they had been caught violating the permit, the pollution regulations 300 sometimes. I want to couch my argument with this. You have the greatest tradespeople and craftspeople in the world here in northeastern Minnesota. That's a given. But they take their orders from an engineer that presents them a building plan. When the lobbyists come to you to see you senators, you need to stop them in their tracks every time they say that Minnesota regulations are so strong that we can advance with this copper nickel crap. We can't. We're already probably looking at a Superfund site at Birch Lake, and probably Hay Creek, and probably Dark River. Like I say, all three watersheds. You have data right now at your disposal from Northern Lakes Scientific Advisory Panel that tracked sulfide discharges from the Mintac and Minorca mines right up the Wurry River, Vermillion River, through Crane Lake, and all the way to the International Bridge at International Falls. You can find that out for yourself. Sulfide copper nickel ore is far, far, far too dangerous to even contemplate here. Thanks.
I'm trying to get to everyone, guys. So there's a lot of people with their hands up there, so I'm sorry.
Hi, I'm Johnny Hyde from Ely. I really appreciate that you support the idea of having our way of life in northern Minnesota. And I know for you that includes mining. I'd like to recognize that it also should include hunting, fishing, harvesting blueberries and wild rice. And with that, I would like to know why you cast the tie-breaking vote against the Wild Rice Act.
Yeah, I didn't. We added it to the Environment Omnibus Bill.
I'm sorry.
So we added it, it's in the environment omnibus bill in the Senate. We negotiated it, and I worked with Senator Kunish, and we have a provision in the environment omnibus bill that protects the innate significance of wild rice.
Okay, thank you. And I would encourage you to recognize that if you need to support mining, and you do support mining, at least support the water clean standards.
First of all, thank you, Senator Hauschild, for hosting and attending the session, and Senator Murphy as well. So I have two topics, and then following with a question at the end, the two topics that you're well involved in. The first one, ATVs, and there's a lot of different proposals, but so I'll just hit on one. South of Highway 2, the law is that trails that are to be not used by ATVs are designated, as well as trails that ATVs can use. And I would like to ask that you support legislation that for northern Minnesota also that trails would be designated as for ATVs, because if they only say when they can't be used, if the signs go down, then how are people to know whether they're allowed to go on there or not? The second gets into the issue of which you support, thankfully, is jobs for the National Forest people. And so I applaud your statement on that, to protect recreation for users as well as the recreation industry. And I'd like to extend a little bit to the boundary waters. There's been a lot said on that tonight. So I would like to emphasize one particular effort. If you mentioned you want to have reviews by the DNR, they should be employing the very highest standards, not the medium standards, not the low standards, the very highest, which I mentioned in an earlier discussion, which is LOPA, or layers of protection analysis. And that's the way to make sure that for the protecting the boundary waters, use the very highest standards to protect them. So my request or question, have you gone to the DNR and asked them if they have considered using LOPA analysis, or have you gone to any of the mining companies and asked them if they've used or plan to use LOPA analysis for evaluating risks of these projects?
I have not, but I'm certainly willing to explore that further with you and look into it more and learn more about it. I appreciate the question, yeah.
My name is Kurt Dorn. I'm originally from Ely. I live in Babbitt now, and the gentleman in front here mentioned Birch Lake, one of the two being a Superfund site, and I would just like to refute that and maybe bring it to your attention, if it isn't already there, that we in this state have a sulfate limit of 10 parts per million. Birch Lake is listed as impaired for wild rice because of sulfate with a concentration of 10.6 parts per million, and I don't think that includes the entire data set of what's been collected from Birch Lake, but not a lot, right? Birch Lake is harvested annually and has been for decades and will be for decades, with no change in the rice on Birch Lake. So, at what point do we get to a spot here where we're arguing about these tenths of a part per million? And yet you can go on the lake and see that the wild rice, there's a professor here, O'Neill Tedrow, who's done his doctorate work on wild rice, and Birch Lake has been part of that research. When can the state figure out how we can go about that better, right? And I'm not saying that we should go and, I support copper nickel mining. I've worked in the industry for almost 18 years now, but I'm also from Ely and I love the boundary waters, and so I don't want to pollute the boundary waters. But everyone in this room is on the hook for a footprint, right? Like all of humanity is on the hook for a footprint. So we're exporting a lot of our risk and environmental obligation to other places with questionable standards. preempting any debate on mining in Minnesota. Grant, I appreciate what you said about letting the DNR and PCA, the Department of Health, be the guiding light in that process. But how do we make that process better? So maybe this is getting into the streamlining permitting discussion that's been going on for a while, and maybe talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. This is something that's really important to me. And it's not just, I want to be really abundantly clear, it's not just about mining. In fact, I would argue it's about far, far more than mining. In the state of Minnesota, we have to be competitive, right? And I'm a Democrat, so I believe in government. I believe in the ability to impact people's lives in a positive way using government. But if I believe in government, I also have to make sure that it actually works for people on the ground, that their experience with their government is effective and efficient and works well. And when it comes to the business climate in Minnesota, I continue to be concerned that we don't have a process that really works well for people. That doesn't mean skirting environmental standards. It doesn't mean skirting labor standards that we're really, really proud of in Minnesota. But what it does mean is making it so that our agencies have the resources, have the timelines in place, and can actually be responsive to people when they have an application that could create jobs for our state. So last year I worked on a coordinated project plan proposal that would make it so that agencies have to work together on certain projects to better coordinate from the very beginning on what that permitting process will look like. Again, not changing any standards, just trying to create a better coordinated process. Now this year, I've been working across the aisle and with some other Democratic senators, Senator Kupek out of Moorhead and Senator Frentz out of Mankato, to look at how we can streamline those timelines and figure out how to do this process better. We've actually been working with environmental groups, tribal governments, the Chamber of Commerce, the building trades, labor, on coming to a compromise on that bill. And I'm proud to say that the permitting reform that I've put forward got unanimous votes out of the Environment Committee. Unanimous. I don't know if you guys know the Environment Committee in the State Senate, but it's not a unanimous group. And so the fact that we were able to put forward a permitting package that everybody agreed on, that is substantial. And I think it's going to make a big difference for our business community. And I hope we can pass it ultimately with the House.
Hello, I'm Kyle Grant, and I also live in Ely. So I am fully for the boundary waters and 100% against mining. And I just wanted to mention that, like, there's really no reason at all to have mining that would pollute the boundary waters. I think, like, if there is mining that doesn't pollute it, or even like outside the boundary waters, I haven't even really thought about that, but anything in the boundary waters that would pollute it, there is absolutely zero reason. Some people say that, like, it would be good for money, but if you pollute the boundary waters, you're losing a lot more money than you're gaining from doing the mining. Because, like, you definitely gain stuff, but if you totally pollute the boundary waters, you don't get any of the money that you get from, like, tourism and, like, just people going into boundary waters. And also, like, I just don't see, like, I think everybody here agrees that the boundary waters is awesome. So, and I don't know a single person that would disagree with me on that. And I think everybody knows that, like, the serenity and beautiful place that is the boundary waters, I don't know why anybody would disagree with that. And also, like, there's definitely people, like, in my school that are, like, pro-mining, for sure. But there's not a single person I know in my school that would actually want to be a miner. So, like, I don't see any reason that it would be an actually good thing. So I think you should probably try your hardest to have protections for the boundary waters. And I think if there's any mining that would pollute the boundary waters at all, you should definitely vehemently disagree with that.
I really appreciate the way that you're approaching this question. And I want to draw a line between what you're raising and what Maggie raised before. She raised the notion that the Democratic Party is perhaps walking away from working people or our values because of money, and perhaps money in democracy or money in industry. And if I were in a room with Minnesotans and we could decide, of course we want to protect the boundary waters, and we believe in science, and were curious enough to say, I wonder if it is possible, and that just this is hypothetical, is it possible to do copper nickel mining and protect our water? And if we're left to us, by ourselves, this is hypothetical, by ourselves, with our own curiosity, our own science, our University of Minnesota, and our eye, and we proved it to ourselves, that would be a path. But when I think about what Maggie had to say, and the power of corporations, some of them that are not American, and the money that they have, and the fear I often hear when we talk about this issue of that money corrupting the process by which a decision would be made. We end up in a place like this over and over again, where we don't have the capacity to rationally say, yeah, maybe there is a way or not. And I think Maggie's question, what you raised, is so critically important to what we're doing right here in this room. And Senator Hauschild, Grant talked about that piece of legislation that I think is going to become law in Minnesota one day, maybe this year, maybe soon, where we say to the oligarchs, to Elon Musk and others, you don't get to mine our data for free. And it's a place where we can go for revenue. But we're also saying what you're doing is actively harming communities. You're separating people from one another. And there should be an eye on that as well. I think there are a lot of people in America and in Minnesota right now who are struggling with the day-to-day things in their lives. The cost of housing, the cost of food, access to health care, trust in a government that is there to serve them. And a lot of it is because the reins of power aren't necessarily entirely held by us anymore. When you see Elon Musk in the White House doing what he's doing, I don't feel confident that the government is there to serve us. So your question is really important, and it's connected to what Maggie brought up. And I think we have to think about those two things together, because we do want to protect our water. I don't know a single person in the legislature who doesn't want to protect our water or our way of life. And we have to make sure we have our eyes set on the ways that we know how to do it, which is one of the reasons why I think Senator Hauschild keeps talking about the importance of a process that we can count on, that isn't disrupted by powerful influences that are not in our hands.
Thank you, both senators, for being here today. And students, I look back here to this young lady back behind me that is our future. I wish there was a 10th, a 20th of this amount of people that was at our school board meeting last night. Last year we cut $225,000 from our school budget. Last night it was $450,000. Yeah, nobody follows that, nobody tracks that. But when we come to these town halls, it seems like, you know, who's going to bring up school? Who's going to bring up rural schools and funding them? We have some teachers in here and a lot of parents in here that I guess I'm fired up. I've raised 4 kids that have gone through Ely School. Still 3 of them in the school. To answer this gentleman's question in front of me, one of those kids wants to be a mining engineer, right? So they're out there. There's colleges out there. I believe it was 3 years ago we sent a kid to South Dakota School of Mines, top of his class, 2 years in a row. You know, Ely puts out some pretty damn good kids, and we need to continue to do that. We need to continue to think about our schools, think about our facilities, you know, keeping families coming to towns like this. So next school board meeting, I hope to see, like I said, a 20th of this at that next school board meeting. Finally, I'd like to thank our school board and our teachers there. So anything you guys have to say about schools? So.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, part of the reason that my wife and I moved to Minnesota was because of education and because of the quality of schools in Minnesota. It's something that's fundamentally important to me. You know, I will say, since I've been elected, I've been trying to make education a top priority. And I know for Ely in particular, we've gotten money for their facilities to bridge the gap on the referendum construction project. The one thing that I've really been looking at, though, is some of the challenges facing particularly our greater Minnesota schools. When we look at things like PSEO, and this is a really tough issue. This is where students choose to get college credit courses, for those of you that don't know. When they do that, that causes that money to get pulled from that local school. So it's this weird place where we're providing opportunities for our kids to get additional education, but unfortunately it impacts particularly rural schools when you pull those pupils out of the school district. We also know that homeschooling is becoming more and more popular. That's also pulling money from our public schools. So those two things alone are dramatically impacting particularly school districts like Ely. The other thing that I've really been looking at is the fact that our seasonal recreation property, cabins, in our districts do not apply towards the operating levies for our rural schools. This is an incredible inequity for our greater Minnesota schools, particularly up here in northern Minnesota. And it's an issue that was created by the Ventura and Pawlenty administration when there were budget problems. They said, oh, those northern Minnesota schools won't mind. We'll just pull those levies away from the wealthiest households in their districts, and we'll pull them towards the general fund at the state to plug some budget gaps. This has been going on for over 20 years, and it's suffocating school districts like Ely. So right now I have a proposal that would bring back an aid package from the state to make up for the fact that those cabin tax dollars are not going to local school districts. It would have a huge impact on Ely, and I'm really, really, really hopeful that we can get it in the tax omnibus bill and then go to negotiations with the House and try to actually get something done on that for the first time in 20-some years.
15 minutes left, folks. So we have 15 minutes left, so I'm going to try to get to everyone who's been raising their hands. I'm sorry if we don't get to you, but I've been kind of keeping track of who's been having their hands up for a while here. So.
Hi, I'm Gillian Fitzgerald, and I live in Ely, Minnesota. So thank you both for coming here. It's always nice when we don't have to drive 2 hours to go somewhere important. So really, thank you. I'd like to advocate that the boundary waters deserve to be permanently protected from copper nickel mining, and I talked to you about that. I talked to you about that at your town hall in Grand Marais. So my question for you today is that I'm concerned about repeated attempts to repeal Minnesota's wild rice sulfate standard. It's an important protection for wild rice waters and tribal treaty resources. You've acknowledged the standard impacts mining and suggested it could be reconsidered, but you've also said you wouldn't support weakening Minnesota's environmental standards. My question for you today is, will you keep your commitment to our state's environment in mind as conversations around this issue continue? As we've seen that we can't rely on the federal government anymore, we need you to step up at the state level. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the question. I want us to meet our sulfate rule. Like, I want us to do everything in our power, and I talked about this at the last town hall. I want us to do the research through NRRI. I want us to make sure that we're helping provide for any municipalities that might have to meet that standard in the future. But what we're talking about is a key tack mine that could shut down if we're unable to meet this standard. And right now, they can't meet the standard. So how do we bridge the gap and help a mine like Keetac stay open? We know that Minorca and Hibtac currently laid off 630 miners, and I will not make a decision that's going to lay off hundreds more miners. I just won't do it. So how do I make sure that we can bridge that gap? And that's what I'm trying to work on. I don't want to reduce any environmental standards, and I'm not doing that through the permitting reform that I'm working on, but I do want us to work through our agencies with our mines and say, how can we get as close as possible to meeting the standard, and what's the timeline that we need and the investment that we need in order to meet the standard? So that's what I'm currently working on.
Presently, there is a mandate on the federal level for voter ID with proof of citizenship. I believe there's also one in Minnesota that is mandating the same. And is that something that Governor Walz has already signed, or is it still going through the houses and through the Senate?
You know, a number of years ago, more than a decade ago, Minnesota rejected a ballot question on voter ID. We did it it was in the election of 2012. So we've said no to this idea. In the Congress, it's the U.S. House working on the SAVE Act, which would require documentary proof of citizenship, which would disenfranchise millions of voters. One segment of voters would be women who got married and changed their name. And if they can't find their original documents, they might not have access to the ballot. So this is not something that Minnesota has taken up. There might be legislation introduced, but we're not hearing it in the Minnesota Senate. And I don't believe it's anything that the governor would support. No.
My name is Dina Sorkin, and I'm the EMS director for the city of Tower. Mr. Peterson did speak about all of us joining together to have a larger EMS system. Everybody worries about it, that we would lose our small areas. We wouldn't. If it was done right, you would have, Tower would still have their base. Babbitt would have their base. Ely would have their base. What you have is the ability to pay our EMS providers a living wage. Right now, we are not paying living wages. I look at what my people work for, and I look at what they go through. We had a STEMI, which is an active heart attack, in Tower yesterday. We could not fly. We got Virginia ALS on board with us, and we took that patient straight to Duluth, where they were taken into the cath lab, and they were made better. It comes down to, we work our tails off. This is a huge thing, and without us, people would not survive. You know, we keep wanting to say the hospitals are bad or anything. You know what? Our providers up here rock. There are doctors up here that keep people alive. We need to start looking at working together. What he was talking about with a fire district does not close stations particularly. It finds the best spots to put them in each area so that we are providing service for this larger area. And if we were to get taxes along with that, we could become self-sufficient without needing these extra amounts, without having to go and see Grant all the time. He knows I'm a pain in his butt. But what it comes down to is we matter.
I just want to thank Dina for her service. What you do is incredible. What our life-saving folks do, our first responders, it's really, really incredible, particularly when you consider the fact that so many of these folks are volunteers or getting paid minimal amounts in order to be on call and provide that life-saving care. And what I have said since I was elected is, it should not matter what your zip code is, whether or not an ambulance can arrive and provide life-saving care that you need. It should not matter your zip code. Unfortunately, what we do see is the current system makes it so that our rural services can't survive. Whether it's the Medicaid, Medicare reimbursement rates, whether it's the distances they have to travel, whether it's the fact that we have an aging population and more calls and more needs, whether it's the hospital structures that don't have the funds and capabilities of helping fund these services from a private sector, or the thing that drives me most crazy is the private providers that can provide these services, provide them in the places where they make money. They only buy the license where they can make money, and they leave the rest to you guys to put it on your property taxes to fund the services in your area. It's absolutely insane. So we at the state level have to look at this process and figure out, how do we provide state support in a meaningful and thoughtful way that can help you guys provide these services? Because again, it's a moral imperative on the state that regardless of your zip code, you have ambulance services. And that's what we're working on. It's slower than we would like. Totally agree with you. I understand. But we are doing everything we can to try to make this system work. And we're going to keep chipping away at it. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Steve Holthouse. I just want to thank you guys for coming out today. I really appreciate it. It's nice to hear some civility and some back and forth rather than what we hear at the White House. I just wanted to touch on education, particularly mental health care in the schools. I just don't think it gets talked enough about, incorporated enough. There's so many people that are hurting out there, especially what we've been going through, COVID, other things, and I just want to know where you stand on that and how we can make it better probably not just in the schools, but everywhere. There's just a lot going on in the world. Thank you.
I was in St. Cloud yesterday and met with a group of veterans who raised the same issue. We have a colleague, Senator Seeberger, who is working on a piece of legislation to provide more mental health support for construction workers because the rate of death by suicide within that population of people is on the rise. Same thing with farmers. We know it's a problem in our schools. I think that that tells us is we have a systemic problem with how we deliver and pay for mental health care, where it happens, how it happens. It's not evenly distributed. We treat it like episodic disease instead of an ongoing condition, and people are paying a price for it. So I'm glad you raised it. We need more help in schools, but I think it's a systemic problem, and we need to build the system that actually meets the needs of people.
Thank you guys so much for participating in your democracy. Thank you all for the questions and the passion behind your questions. I want to be accessible to all of you, so I hope that you all have the opportunity to reach out to my office, or maybe you already have. I'm going to keep doing these. Like I said, this is my 5th town hall that I was doing, and I want to thank Leader Murphy for being here and hearing the voices of you all and Northern Minnesotans. This is really important to me. Not every politician is taking time to be available to their citizens and doing town halls, and I think that's a real disservice, to say the least. And so I really do appreciate you all being here. If you ever need to reach out to me, please don't hesitate. You can just Google my name. It'll come up to my Senate office. You can reach out to me. For those of you that want to take down my cell phone number, I'd happily give you those. Dina, Lee, other people, Joe, reach out to me all the time. So 218-580-0845, 218-580-0845. It'll be recorded. You can take it down. Please reach out to me directly, and if I don't answer right away, I'll try my best to get back to you. But
He gets back to you.
Yeah. Thank you all for being here. It really means a lot.
This area is so fortunate to have Senator Hauschild in office. There isn't someone who I've seen come in, work so hard, so skillfully, so committed to the community. He's direct and honest. He's the real deal. I'm so glad to be here with him. I'm so glad to be with you. Thank you for fighting for us, for Minnesota, and for America. I'll see you soon.